Right now, the world thinks Europe just secured its ultimate energy shield. Politicians are shaking hands, claiming the gas crisis is permanently solved. But let's look at the physical reality. Out in the deep water, a billion-dollar floating gas terminal is sitting practically dead. Millions of gallons of super-chilled fuel are trapped inside heavy steel tanks. The massive mechanical valves are wide open. So why isn't the gas moving north? Because a silent 5-border pipeline trap is choking the pressure. It is bleeding the cash flow dry with hidden transit taxes before a single molecule even crosses the mountains. You think your winter utility bill is driven by free market supply and demand? Or are sovereign toll booths secretly draining your bank account while massive machines just sit there burning cash? Drop your thoughts below. Welcome to Energy Axis Intel. Look, everyone out there is obsessing over the high-level politics, the treaties, and the diplomatic chessboards. But they are completely missing the concrete. They are missing the actual plumbing. Let's look at the physical reality here. Geopolitical rhetoric doesn't move a single cubic meter of gas. Physical pressure differentials do. While the bureaucrats argue in clean boardrooms, the real story is written in rusted steel valves, massive multi-stage compressors, and the unyielding mathematics of cross-border regulatory ledger books. If the structural mechanics don't balance out perfectly, the cross-border cash flow stops dead. It's that simple. Let's do the math on how this massive engineering illusion actually falls apart at the very first border crossing. Let's look at the blueprint they sold to the public. On paper, the vertical corridor is an absolute masterpiece of geopolitical engineering. The vision is massive. You take American and Qatari liquefied natural gas, land it at the Greek floating terminals in the Aegean Sea, and pump it straight north. They promised a seamless, high-pressure continental highway, a continuous steel artery pushing billions of cubic meters of gas through Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. The ultimate destination, Ukraine's massive underground gas storage fields. We are talking about the Bolshevo-Volitsko-Uhersky facility, a natural geological vault capable of holding over 30 billion cubic meters of fuel deep inside the Earth's crust. Listen to the sales pitch. They told us this was the final nail in the coffin for Russian pipeline dominance. By mechanically reversing the historical gas flow from south to north, Europe would achieve total energy independence. The politicians drew straight, clean lines on a digital map and called it a unified energy grid. In their minds, you just open the massive cryogenic valves in Alexandroupolis. The heavy turbine compressors spin up to maximum RPM, and the gas effortlessly flows thousands of kilometers to heat homes in Warsaw and power heavy manufacturing in Berlin. It is a beautiful, flawless narrative of steel, pressure, and sovereignty. A unified continental machine running in perfect mechanical harmony. But maps are just paper, and drawing a straight line completely ignores the brutal physical friction waiting at the border. But let's step away from the political map and look at the physical reality. Look at the actual engineering required to make this work. When an LNG carrier arrives in the Aegean Sea, it isn't delivering gas. It is delivering a highly concentrated, super-chilled liquid. To pack enough energy into those ships, they have to freeze the natural gas down to minus 162 degrees Celsius. That is minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. At that extreme temperature, the gas violently collapses, shrinking 600 times in volume. It becomes a dense, boiling cryogenic fluid held inside heavy, insulated steel thermoses. But wait a minute. You can't just dump minus 162-degree liquid into a standard continental steel pipeline. It would instantly shatter the metal from thermal shock. You have to boil it back into a gas. This is where the floating regasification unit, the FSRU, comes in. It's basically a massive, floating industrial heater. To boil that liquid, the ship sucks in millions of gallons of raw seawater, pumps it through giant titanium heat exchangers, and uses the ocean's ambient temperature to flash the liquid back into vapor. And right there is your first brutal thermodynamic penalty. You spent millions freezing it in Texas or Qatar, just to spend millions melting it in Greece. Now you have high-pressure gas. It expands violently, taking up 600 times its original space. But gas doesn't just naturally flow north. It faces massive mechanical friction inside the pipe and the relentless pull of gravity as the pipeline climbs the Balkan mountains. To force those molecules across the borders, you need colossal compressor stations. These are essentially strapped-down jet engines. They burn up to 3% of the very gas they are transporting just to generate the 80 to 100 bars of pressure required to push the flow forward. Add in the fact that raw salt water is aggressively eating away at the hull of the FSRU 24/7. This isn't a magical political bridge. It is a violently expensive mechanical beast that demands millions of dollars in operational cash every single day just to fight the laws of physics. Let's look at the foundation. Before a single molecule of gas ever gets frozen or boiled, someone has to pay for the heavy steel. We are talking about massive capital expenditure, the CAPEX trap. The Alexandroupolis FSRU, the subsea manifolds, and the high-pressure land pipelines didn't just manifest out of thin air. We are looking at hundreds of millions of euros in upfront construction costs. So, who actually signed those massive checks? Look closely at the regulatory ledger. It wasn't just private risk capital taking a bold gamble. This entire physical grid was heavily subsidized by European taxpayer grants and tightly underwritten by state-backed sovereign debt. The politicians sold it as a public good, an unshakable anchor for regional security. But let's do the math on who actually won the CAPEX game. The specialized maritime engineering firms, the massive industrial foundries forging the cryogenic containment tanks, the international contractors pouring thousands of tons of high-density concrete. They did not take on the long-term operational risk. They took their massive construction margins up front. They got paid in hard cash the moment the heavy mechanical valves were bolted into place and the ceremonial ribbon was cut. They secured their profit and walked away. But what happens when the physical flow stops? What happens when the pipeline transmission auctions of February 2026 fail miserably, leaving zero capacity booked because traders absolutely refuse to pay the 5 border transit tax? The heavy contractors are already gone. Who is left holding the bag? The state, the taxpayers, and the local utility grids. They are now clutching a completely stranded infrastructure asset. A multi-million-dollar floating thermos and hundreds of miles of empty steel pipe that still demand daily financial upkeep but generate absolutely zero transit revenue. The concrete is poured, the debt is firmly locked in, and the mechanical asset is depreciating in salt water. That is the ultimate CAPEX trap. You privatize the upfront construction margins, and you socialize the heavy, empty steel. So the concrete is poured, the steel is laid, but the real bleed starts the moment the turbines spin up. Think about this. You are running massive industrial-grade compressor stations 24/7 just to keep the gas moving. These machines aren't free to operate. They are powered by the gas they transport. It's a parasitic load. You are burning a portion of the very commodity you're trying to sell, just to keep the pressure high enough to overcome the friction of the pipe. If the price of gas spikes, your operational cost spikes with it. You're trapped. And then there is the environment. You aren't building in a clean, temperature-controlled laboratory. You are building in the middle of a corrosive, salty marine environment. Salt water is the natural enemy of steel. It eats away at the hull of the FSRU. It attacks the exposed welds, and it penetrates the insulating layers of the cryogenic tanks. Maintenance here isn't just scheduled. It's a constant, reactive, high-stakes battle against oxidation. Every single hour of uptime requires a constant flow of lubricants, spare parts, and specialized labor that never sleeps. You don't get to turn this off. If you turn it off, the pressure drops. If the pressure drops, the system fails. You are paying for the privilege of keeping this machine alive, even on the days it generates zero profit. This isn't an asset that sits there and accrues value. It's an open wound that bleeds cash every second it stays powered on. Let's bring this down to your wallet. You might think a failed gas auction in February 2026, thousands of miles away, doesn't affect you. But let's do the math on how this structural failure directly drains your bank account. When global energy traders looked at that 5-border transit tax, they didn't just complain. They walked away. They rerouted their massive LNG vessels to alternative terminals in Poland and the Baltic Sea, where the plumbing is simpler and the toll booths are fewer. So, what happens to the colossal Greek infrastructure? It becomes a stranded asset. But remember the operational bleed we just looked at. The parasitic load, the aggressive saltwater corrosion, the heavy sovereign debt. Those multi-million-dollar maintenance bills still come due every single month. And since the international traders aren't paying for it through transit fees, someone else has to. That someone is the domestic retail grid. The state quietly shifts the daily losses of this empty mega machine directly onto local utility tariffs. Your electric company raises its baseline rates just to cover the cost of a giant steel thermos sitting completely idle in the Aegean Sea. But it doesn't stop at your home thermostat. Heavy manufacturing, the steel mills, the fertilizer plants, the concrete factories, they consume massive amounts of raw power. When their industrial energy tariffs spike to cover this dead geopolitical infrastructure, The cost of producing every single physical good skyrockets. It triggers a relentless cascade of manufacturing inflation. You are not just paying for the energy you consume. You are paying a hidden premium for the empty pipes, the unyielding transit taxes, and the structural friction of a completely failed strategy. The machine is broken, and you are subsidizing the rust. Let's talk about the practical escape. Because while the retail utility grid bleeds, the apex predators of the energy market are quietly making an absolute fortune. Who are they? Western logistics operators and private infrastructure funds. They looked at the five-border transit trap in the Balkans and completely bypassed it. They do not play the geopolitical waiting game. They operate on a cold, simple engineering principle. Fluid dynamics favor the path of least resistance. So, what is their mechanical genius? Maritime agility. Instead of locking their capital into immovable concrete pipelines crossing 5 sovereign jurisdictions, they utilize long-term, asset-backed maritime charters. They reroute their massive LNG carriers directly to alternative northern routes, like the Polish terminal corridors. There are no multinational toll booths on the open ocean. If a specific regional market tries to squeeze them with excessive transit taxes, they don't sit down to negotiate. They literally detach the heavy cryogenic loading hoses, spin up the massive ship propellers, and sail their billion-dollar floating assets to a more profitable harbor. They own the steel ships, they control the physical delivery, and they entirely avoid the landlocked friction. Now, let's do the math on your micro application. How do you pivot your wallet? You need to stop looking at state-subsidized midstream pipeline projects as safe financial havens. A static pipeline that crosses 5 borders is just a hostage to 5 different governments. Shift your perspective to mechanical agility. Look into moving your personal capital toward high-yield, flexible maritime logistics, ETFs, and private physical commodity infrastructure. You want to invest in the heavy steel that moves across the water, not the concrete that gets buried and taxed in the dirt. Let's get one thing straight. Geography is nothing but imaginary lines drawn on a piece of paper by politicians. You can sign all the security treaties you want. You can park entire naval fleets in the Aegean Sea to project power. You can draw massive red circles around an energy anchor on a digital presentation board. But none of that matters to the heavy steel. None of that matters to the physical molecules of gas. Real geopolitical power is not decided in clean diplomatic boardrooms. It is determined by thermodynamic efficiency and unyielding transit math. If your infrastructure burns more energy than it produces, and if your cross-border toll booths drain the profit margin before the fuel even reaches its destination, your strategy is mechanically dead on arrival. The global market does not care about the grand narrative of European energy independence. The market only respects the path of least physical and financial resistance. We have engineered a modern world where the physical machine dictates the geopolitical reality, not the other way around. If you ignore the friction of the pipeline simply becomes a multi-billion-dollar monument to your own financial failure. So I want you to look at your own portfolio, and I want you to make a choice. Let's do the math on the risk. Option A, you lock your capital into a state-funded, static steel pipeline. It is permanently bolted to the ground, forced across 5 different sovereign regulatory borders, constantly bleeding cash to parasitic compressor loads, and absolutely held hostage by 5 different transit tariffs. Or option B, you put your money into heavy floating maritime steel, a flexible billion-dollar cryogenic vessel that completely bypasses the landlocked friction, answers to no multinational toll booths, and can literally sail away to a higher-paying market. The moment a local government tries to squeeze its margins, which mechanical asset are you betting your financial future on? The buried concrete or the moving steel? Drop your answer in the comments below and let me know why. The world is not run by political speeches. It is run by physical pressure, mechanical friction, and the unyielding math of capital expenditure. If you really want to understand where the global power actually lies, stop watching the news networks. Look at the heavy steel. Look at the operational ledger. Follow the massive mechanical assets moving across the water, and you will always find the truth. We are going to keep tracking the concrete, the pipelines, and the cash flow that the elite want you to ignore. Keep your mind open, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.